All right, so feeding in the next 6 months changes a little bit. Breast milk or formula should still be the primary source of nutrition. And that getting weaned off of formula or breast milk or eating more solid food is not an indication of advancement in an infant. They really should have breast milk or formula for the first 6 months. Absolute earliest to start adding some other foods is 4 months. And in the second 6 months, most of their intake should still be breast milk or formula. If the formula is not mixed with fluoridated water, then they may start to need some fluoride supplementation as they're getting teeth. Solid foods should be added one at a time. And we have traditional baby foods. We have baby cereals that can be mixed with a little breast milk. We have little jarred baby foods. There are recommendations to start with rice cereal because it's not a common allergen. There are recommendations to start with vegetables because they're not sweet and fruits are. But the most important thing is to add solid foods one at a time to see how that child reacts to them. Solid foods are for learning. They should not be the bulk of that child's nutrition until after the first year. Okay, this is a gradual transition over several months from breast milk or formula to solid foods. It's not a 2-week, we're going to switch them over. Okay, we want to make this a gradual transition. We want to teach parents observe that infant's cues when they're turning away or refusing the food, then parents need to let that go because they're teaching the child to listen to their hunger cues. That may mean that they're not hungry anymore. Infant cereals can be mixed with breast milk or formula for a familiar taste. Juice can be offered. It's not necessary, but it should be limited to 4 to 6 ounces. Drinking a lot of juice actually is associated with a higher risk of obesity later because it's a lot of calories and sugar in a small volume. Historically, we would tell parents to avoid the most common allergens when they were feeding their babies, give them things that are not likely to be allergens, and delay the allergens until after 1 year, or even at one point it was after 3 years. New research has showed that delaying those allergenic foods beyond 6 months may increase allergy rather than decrease it. So they can be introduced along with everything else. Just make sure you're introducing, or the parents need to make sure they're introducing one food at a time, wait several days and see how they do with that. Food should be either pureed or they should be cooked soft enough for the baby to mash with their gums. We want to teach parents to avoid the clean your plate idea or encouraging the baby to eat when they're not hungry. And we want to strongly discourage adding foods to the bottle. They take in too much. It's an aspiration risk, and they can get a lot more calories than they need by doing that. So we want to discourage that. We want them eating solids with fingers and spoon. A variety of fruits and vegetables are preferred to fortified foods and supplements. So they have the little puff things that dissolve away really quickly, and they have crackers and things like that that are snacks for babies that are learning to eat. But they're going to get more nutrients from fruits and vegetables that are cooked soft enough to be eaten. Babies can begin to learn self-feeding. Sometimes parents will give the baby a spoon and they have a spoon and they let the baby play with the spoon while they feed the baby, and eventually they start using it. Some parents give a lot of finger foods. They give a lot of foods that are soft enough to mash, but they can be picked up, like fruits cooked really soft, things like that. If parents decide during this time that they want to wean the baby from breast milk, before 1 year, they need to be weaned to formula. Okay, so anytime before 1 year, if they're weaning from breastfeeding, they need to wean to formula. That feeding can be, it's better to wean one feeding at a time if possible. It's less stressful for the baby, but also it allows the breast milk production to decrease gradually to help prevent engorgement and mastitis. And that feeding can be replaced. That formula can be in a cup or a bottle, either way. As they get toward the end of the first year, then they may begin replacing some of those bottles of formula with a solid food. The nighttime feeding is usually the last one to discontinue. You need to know about a couple of practices because you will run across families who do this. One is extended breastfeeding. There are families that breastfeed past 1 year. The World Health recommendation is actually 2 years, but the APA recommends at least 1 year and as long as it's mutually acceptable. So what you need to know about breastfeeding past 1 year is that there is absolutely no evidence that it is harmful in any way. Okay. So if families want to do that, there's no evidence that it's harmful. Another thing you need to know about is child-led weaning. Okay, there's child-led weaning and there's baby-led weaning, and they are not the same thing. Okay, child-led weaning is when the parent decides to allow the breastfeeding child to gradually stop nursing or to decide when to stop nursing. And if they're introduced to other foods and they're eating other foods, then a neurotypical child will gradually decrease the frequency of feedings and eventually stop on their own. That time tends to be anywhere between 2 and 7 years old. A lot of parents kind of do a combination of this, and they get to the point that they're like, okay, that's enough, and they decide a time frame to wean that child. But strict child-led weaning is waiting until the child decides to stop breastfeeding. And again, there is no indication, there's no evidence this is harmful. Sorry, there's no evidence that that's harmful. Now, there's another term that you're going to hear, and you need to not confuse it with child-led weaning. This is not going to be on the test. This is just for your information, because you're going to hear these things and be like, what? Isn't that the same? The term baby-led weaning refers to a child beginning to eat solid foods. There are parents who don't use commercial baby foods. Instead, they just prepare to whatever the family's eating in a way that the baby can eat it. So they may prepare it with less seasoning and make sure that things are cooked softer or whatever. And so the baby is actually eating real table food from the beginning. And if they're waiting until 6 months to start adding things into the diet, that usually works out okay. The only safety hazard is they need to make sure that, first of all, they need to make sure that they're giving the baby healthy foods, actual real food and not processed things. But also they need to make sure that the foods that they're providing are not choking hazards. Okay, in the next section, we'll talk about sleep and activity, dental health, and we're not really going to talk much about immunizations, but we'll skim by that.